The rancher gave away his last horse to 2 Apache sisters. By sunrise, their father rode in with 200 warriors at his back. Folk said a man with nothing left wouldn't gamble away his last shot at survival. That was the logic. That was what people believed. But when Jace led that horse out of the barn at dusk, his shirt torn and dirt clinging to him, he didn't look like a man making sense of things. He looked like a man who had already shaken hands with the end. The 2 young women standing at the edge of his land didn't belong there, yet there they were. One leaned hard on the other, blood soaking dark into the fabric of her dress. They didn't plead. They didn't even ask. They just looked at him with eyes that had long since given up on mercy, as though hope was a luxury no one in their world could afford anymore. Jace had spent 3 months in silence on that dying ranch. 3 months since the drought turned his fields to dust. 3 months since another human voice had crossed his ears. The only thing he'd guarded in that hollow stretch of time was the horse. His last piece of worth. His one escape. But something in the quiet weight of those sisters stirred a place inside him, maybe broke something that needed breaking. Without a word, he loosed the reins and held them out. The older girl, Mira, fixed her gaze on him like he'd handed her a loaded pistol. Faye, the younger, stared wide-eyed, fear mixed with disbelief. This wasn't how life worked. Men like Jace didn't give away their lifeline. Not to people like them. But Jace only nodded toward the dying sun and stepped back. They took the horse and vanished into the darkening horizon. What Jace couldn't know was that eyes were watching from the ridge above, eyes that carried the sight back to a camp where 200 warriors waited. By dawn, the land trembled. Dust rose in the distance, first a handful of shapes, then dozens, then hundreds. All moving with purpose, heading straight for the ranch. Jace stood in his doorway, rifle within reach but untouched, and knew the die was cast. Whatever storm was coming was already rolling downhill. The question wasn't if they'd reach him, it was why, and what they'd do when they did. His hands hung loose at his sides, trembling against the wood of the frame. He'd known, deep down, from the moment those reins left his hand, that this day would find him. The figures swelled on the horizon, riders, too many to count, moving as one. Hooves pounded the hardpan earth, the sound carrying before their faces could even be seen. 3 months of loneliness, and now this. He thought about running, but there was nowhere left to run. Behind him lay nothing but broken fences and withered land. The barn stood empty, doors sagging on rusted hinges. His only escape was gone with those sisters. The sun climbed cruel and hot, shadows stretching long across the dirt as the tide of riders drew near. Jace squinted through the dust cloud. Had Faye survived the night? Had they made it to wherever they aimed to go, or had their blood brought this army here? The thought churned inside him. Not regret, something heavier, something like acceptance. Choices had weight, and this was his. The riders slowed at the edge of his spread. They moved with order, not chaos. Not a raid. This was deliberate. This was for him. They began to encircle the ranch, a tightening ring of leather and steel. Jace stopped counting after 50. His chest clamped tight. One rider split from the others, cloaked in leather, the wind catching their scarf. Behind them, the sea of warriors held position, waiting. Jace's heart beat like a hammer. He fought to steady his breath. His father's old words cut through the noise, "Panic gets you killed, boy. Hold steady." The lone figure reached the fence line, still as stone. Then, slow as a storm building, they dismounted. Jace's body screamed to reach for the rifle, but instead he stepped away from the doorway, walking into the open where all could see him. If this was the end, he'd meet it standing tall, not hiding. The warrior stepped forward into the yard, the morning light cutting across her face. Jace's breath caught when he recognized her. It was Mira, the older sister. She wasn't the same worn-out figure he'd seen the night before. The weakness was gone, replaced by something harder, sharper. She walked with the certainty of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. There was no gratitude in them. No softness, no relief. They studied him, weighed him, as if deciding what sort of man he truly was. She halted about 15 feet away, near enough to speak, far enough to hold her ground. Jace stood waiting, his throat dry as dust. Mira didn't smile, didn't offer thanks. She just looked at him with a piercing intensity that made his skin tighten. Behind her, the line of warriors remained silent, unmoving, watching every breath he took. At last she spoke, her words steady and heavy. "He wants to see you." It wasn't a request. It was an order. Jace swallowed hard. "Who?" Her face gave nothing away. "The one you gave the horse to is his daughter. You took something from him without asking. Now he'll decide what that means." The word struck his chest like stones. Behind Mira, the riders opened their ranks. A lone figure emerged from the center, moving slow, commanding with every step of his horse. Even from afar, Jace could feel the weight of authority radiating from him. Mira shifted slightly, nodding toward the rider. "That's Rook. And you're about to learn what happens when a man crosses into his family's fate." Rook advanced like a river carving stone, inevitable, unstoppable. His horse moved with steady rhythm, hooves echoing against the earth. As he drew closer, Jace's pulse quickened. The man was older than he had expected. Strands of gray threaded through long black hair. Scars traced across his arms, marking battles survived. His face was weathered, hard, unreadable. Jace forced himself upright. His legs felt weak, but he locked his knees. He wouldn't run. Begging wouldn't change a thing. Whatever judgment came, he'd take it standing. Rook stopped 20 feet away and dismounted in one smooth motion, his boots hitting the earth without a sound. For a moment, he only looked at Jace, not with rage, not with curiosity, but like a man studying an object, trying to decide its worth. Jace's mouth went dry. He wanted to speak, to explain, but words stuck in his throat. What could he say? That he'd pitted them? That watching Faye bleed had cracked something inside him? None of it would matter. Not to a father who had just learned a stranger had tangled with his blood. Rook stepped forward, slow and deliberate, until he stood within reach. Jace could see the lines etched deep around his eyes, the set of his jaw, the calm of his breathing. The man was taller, broader, strength carved by necessity and years of survival. "You gave them the horse." Rook's voice was low, rough, precise. Jace nodded, his voice breaking harsher than he meant. "Yes." "Why?" The word carried like a challenge. 200 warriors watched from behind Rook, every breath hanging on Jace's reply. One wrong word and it could be his last. But lying felt worse than dying. "They needed it more than I did." Rook's eyes narrowed. "You knew who they were?" "No." "You understood what giving away your last animal meant?" "Yes." "And you did it anyway." It wasn't a question. Jace held his tongue. Rook stepped closer until their chests nearly touched. Jace noticed the faint tremor in the man's hands, not weakness, not fear, but something restrained, something held back by sheer will. "My daughter told me what you did." Faye, the younger. She would have died without that horse. They were hunted, 3 men on their trail since dawn. On foot, they'd have never made it. He didn't finish the thought. He didn't have to. A weight shifted inside Jace's chest. His voice cracked. "Is she alive?" For a flicker, something unreadable crossed Rook's expression, surprise, maybe. Then it was gone, his face a mask once more. "She's alive because of you." The words should have felt like a blessing. Instead, they hung in the air like unfinished business. Rook shifted, casting a glance back toward his warriors before fixing his eyes on Jace again. There was something different in that look, something that made Jace's stomach tighten. 3 men were chasing my daughters, Rook said at last. We found them this morning, half a day's ride from here. Jace stood silent, a knot winding tight inside him. They were asking about a rancher. A white man living alone. Wanted to know if he'd seen 2 Apache women. They were headed here next. The meaning struck him hard. Those men had been riding straight for his place. If he hadn't given the sisters the horse, if he'd turned them away on foot, they would have been caught, and he would have been dragged into it, maybe worse. You didn't just save my girls, Rook said quietly. You made yourself a target. Behind him the warriors stirred, not in threat, but like men bracing for what was to come. Rook stepped back, one hand slipping to his side. Jace's muscles locked, certain a weapon was about to clear leather. But instead, Rook pulled out a strip of old braided hide, etched with markings Jace couldn't read. You'll need to ride with us, Rook said. Jace stared at the offered token, mind racing. Ride with you where? Rook's face didn't change. Those men had allies. More are coming. They already know you helped my daughters. Stay here, and you won't live through the week. The weight of it hit like a cold wind. Jace's voice came rough, almost a whisper. And if I go? Rook's gaze pinned him in place. Then you live long enough to understand what you've done. Jace had little to carry. A thin blanket, a dented tin cup, one extra shirt, tossed into a canvas sack that felt light against his shoulder. He gave the ranch, his home for 5 years, one last look. But the land had died with the drought long before today. 2 warriors flanked him on the ride out, not guards, not friends. They watched him with the wary patience of men riding beside a wolf, unsure if it would bear teeth or heal. The trail stretched through harsh country. Jagged rocks, dry washes split wide like cracked leather. The sun burned without mercy. No one spoke, the silence heavier than the heat. Jace kept his eyes forward, reading what he could. These riders weren't restless. They weren't a war party. This was an escort, but toward what he couldn't yet tell. By the time the sun dipped westward, long shadows falling, they topped a ridge. Below, pressed against a canyon wall, lay the camp. Dozens of hide shelters stood in neat order. Smoke curled from cooking fires. Children darted between shelters, their voices faint on the wind. Women worked over flames, steady and sure. Jace blinked, surprised. This wasn't a war camp. This was a village, alive and breathing. They rode down into it, and the place stilled. Faces turned toward him, curious, guarded, some openly distrustful. A knot of elders near the main fire stared with eyes too old to be fooled by much of anything. Rook dismounted, his words flowing in his own tongue with a command that eased some tension, though not all. Jace felt every glance, every unspoken question burning into him. Who is this outsider? Why has he been brought here? From a larger lodge, Mira emerged, moving swiftly to her father's side. She spoke low, motioning toward a smaller shelter set apart. Rook nodded, then looked back at Jace. You'll stay there tonight. Food will be brought. Don't wander. The tone left no room for doubt. Jace followed Mira, aware of eyes on his back with every step. The shelter was small, barely high enough to stand in, with a hide flap for a door. Inside, a simple bedroll, a water skin, some dried meat. Mira stopped at the entrance. For the first time since they'd left his ranch, she met his eyes directly. My sister wants to see you. Jace's chest tightened. Is she? She's mending. The wound was deep but clean. She'll walk again. Myra's voice stayed guarded. She doesn't understand why you did it. None of us do. Jace had no answer. Truth was, he didn't understand it either. Mira studied him for a moment longer, then her voice dropped. The men who chased us, they weren't just drifters. They worked for someone. Someone who wants our father's family gone. Her words iced his gut. Who? We don't know yet. But they're organized, well-funded, and they won't stop because 3 of their men are gone. By helping us, you stepped into their path. That's why my father brought you here. If you'd stayed at that ranch, they'd have found you, and they'd have made you talk before killing you. Jace's fists clenched. I didn't ask for protection. No, Mira said flatly. You didn't ask for anything. That's why you're still breathing. My father has seen many white men. Most wanted land. Some wanted gold. Others wanted glory. But you, she shook her head. You gave away the one thing that kept you alive, and asked for nothing. That unsettles him. And what unsettles him, she added, he studies. Before Jace could reply, shouts rose from the camp's edge. Warriors rushed to their posts, weapons flashing in the firelight. Mira spun toward the noise, her whole body taut. Stay here, she ordered, then sprinted toward the commotion. Mira bolted toward the uproar, leaving Jace standing in the doorway of the small shelter. Through the narrow gaps between lodges he caught sight of warriors rushing to the edge of camp. Shouts rose sharp and urgent, though the words were lost in the wind. Rook strode forward, his presence cutting through the noise like steel. Jace ignored Myra's order to stay put and stepped out, his heart pounding in his ears. Something was wrong, he could feel it in the sudden shift of the air. Even the children had gone quiet. A lone warrior stumbled in from the horizon, his clothes torn, his skin streaked with sweat and dust. Breath ragged, he spoke quickly to Rook, pointing toward the ridgeline. Rook's face darkened. His barked commands tore across the camp, sparking instant order. Warriors vaulted onto horses. Elders gathered children and ushered them inside the shelters. Women armed themselves with blades and bows. Jace caught Mira as she swept past. What's happening? She yanked free, eyes burning. They found us. 20 riders, maybe more, closing in fast. Jace's stomach sank. The men hunting your family? Worse, she snapped, her voice edged with accusation. They're asking about a rancher. A white man who helped 2 Apache sisters escape. The truth struck him like a wave. They weren't only coming for Rook's kin, they were coming for him. Rook wasted no time explaining. He moved like a general, shaping defenses with a sharpness honed by years of survival. Warriors took positions along the canyon rim, archers finding high ground. Others dragged carts, saddles, and bundles into makeshift barricades. Jace stood near the lodge he'd been assigned, torn between feeling useless and guilty. These people had taken him in. Watching them prepare for blood while he had felt like cowardice he couldn't stomach. Mira reappeared, purposeful, a rifle thrust into his hands, his own, taken from his ranch. If you can use it, then use it. If not, stay out of the way. Jace checked the chamber. Loaded. He looked at her. I'm not standing by while others fight on my account. For a split second her expression flickered, something close to respect. Then stay near father. He'll place you. Before he could reply, she was gone. Jace found Rook near the heart of the defenses, bent over maps scratched into the dirt with 3 elder warriors. Escape routes, choke points, weak spots marked by steady hands. Rook looked up, eyes sharp. Can you shoot? Well enough. Rook pointed to a rocky rise that offered both cover and a clear line toward the canyon mouth. There. Don't fire unless I say. We don't yet know their aim. Jace hurried into position, lungs tight, his pulse hammering as the sun sagged low. The canyon was painted in molten shades of orange and shadow. Then the riders came. Black shapes crested the ridge, just as the scout warned. 20 at least, maybe more trailing behind. They rode tight, deliberate, with the confidence of trained men. Not drifters. Not bandits. Soldiers of a different kind. Rook stepped forward into the open, hands empty, back straight, every inch declaring he would not flinch. He wasn't surrendering, but he wasn't striking first either. The riders poured into the canyon, spreading into a wide semicircle that sealed the main exit. Their leader swung down from the saddle, a tall figure with a graying beard, worn leather draped across broad shoulders. Authority clung to him like a second skin. Two men shadowed him, hands resting near their pistols. When he spoke, his voice carried across the rock. "We're looking for two young Apache women. One's wounded. We were told they passed this way." Rook's face stayed carved from stone. "Many passed through here." The bearded man's eyes narrowed. "These two were helped by a rancher, a white man living alone, north of here. We need to speak with him." From behind the rocks, Jace felt his blood run cold. They weren't even pretending. They knew about the sisters. They knew about him. Rook didn't move. His voice cut the air, steady as a blade. "And why do you seek them?" The bearded man's jaw tightened. "That's between us and them. None of your concern." Rook's voice stayed level, but beneath it lay the bite of something dangerous. "Everything that happens on this land is my concern. You ride into my camp armed, barking demands. That makes it my concern." The air grew heavy. Jace could see the riders shifting in their saddles, hands sliding toward their weapons. Violence balanced on the edge of a knife. Slade stepped forward, his voice carrying. "We don't want trouble. Hand over what we came for, and we'll ride out peaceful." "And if I don't?" Rook's question hung like smoke curling upward. Slade's jaw hardened. "Then we'll take what we came for, one way or another." Behind the rocks, Jace's finger tightened on the trigger. Every part of him screamed to stay hidden, let Rook handle this. But the truth pressed down on him like a stone. These men were here because of him, because of a choice he couldn't take back. Before he could stop himself, Jace rose. He stepped out from cover, rifle held low but ready, and walked to Rook's side. Every set of eyes turned to him. Slade's expression shifted, first annoyance, then recognition. "That's him. The rancher." Jace stopped beside Rook, close enough to show he stood with him, but not so close as to crowd his authority. He fixed his gaze on Slade. "I'm here. Let's talk." Rook didn't glance his way, but his voice dropped low, meant only for Jace. "This isn't your fight." Jace kept his eyes on the strangers. "You told me I'd made myself a target. Then the target ought to face what's coming." The canyon went still. For a breath, the world held. Then Slade's smile split the silence. It wasn't friendly. Brave. Foolish. But brave. He flicked his hand. "Bring him." Two riders spurred forward, charging. Rook moved with lightning speed. One moment he stood still, the next he was between Jace and the oncoming riders, his raised hand halting them cold. "No one takes a man from my camp without my word." Slade's grin died. "You're protecting him. A white man, after all his kind have done to yours." Rook's voice dropped lower than steel scraping stone. "He gave my daughters his last horse. That makes him kin. And no one lays a hand on my kin." The word struck like thunder rolling through the canyon. Slade's face darkened. His hand slid for his gun. And then the world shattered. The first shot cracked like bone breaking, echoing off canyon walls. Jace dove, dirt exploding inches from his head. Rook dropped with him, both of them taking cover behind a supply cart as chaos broke loose. Apache rifles barked from the cliffs. Their aim was deadly. 3 of Slade's men dropped in the opening volley. Horses screamed, men shouted, the canyon filled with dust and gun smoke. Jace pressed his back to the cart, lungs burning. The rifle in his hands felt heavier than iron. Beside him, Rook stayed calm, scanning the fight with the steady eye of a man too seasoned to waste panic. "How many rounds you got?" Rook asked over the thunder. "About 12. Make every one count." A rider charged, pistol raised. Jace drew a breath, steadied, and fired. The man pitched backward off his saddle, the horse bolting wild. Jace's hands shook. He'd hunted all his life, deer, small game, once a bear, but never aimed at a man. The weight of it slammed his chest. "Think later," Rook growled. "Survive now." 2 more riders broke cover, trying to flank. Warriors cut them down in brutal hand-to-hand, steel and bone meeting in flashes. Jace scanned for Slade. The leader was nowhere to be seen. If they dropped him, maybe the others would break. Maybe this wouldn't drown the canyon in blood. Then he spotted movement, a figure sliding toward the shelters where the women and children hid. Not Slade. Another. Younger, faster, with a scar ripping down his cheek. Vance. Knife glinting, moving with the practiced stealth of a killer. Jace's stomach dropped. There. Rook's sharp whistle split the noise, summoning 2 warriors to intercept. But Vance was closer, already at the shelter's edge, hand reaching for the hide flap. Jace didn't think. He ran. Jace broke from cover, running low and hard, boots pounding the earth. The distance felt endless, though it was no more than a few heartbeats. Vance had reached the shelter, his scar twisting as he tore for the hide flap. Jace slammed into him like a charging bull, both men crashing into the dirt. The knife flew from Vance's grip, skittering across the ground. Jace lunged, but Vance was quicker than he looked. A fist cracked against Jace's jaw, snapping his head back, stars exploding across his vision. They grappled in the dust, locked in a brutal struggle. Vance was younger, faster, trained to kill. But Jace carried the raw strength of years spent breaking land, hauling water, and wrestling stubborn cattle. His arms clamped tight around Vance's torso, squeezing until he felt ribs strain. Vance choked, thrashing, but Jace only tightened his hold. His muscles screamed, vision blurred, but he refused to let go. Then Mira appeared above them, weapon in hand. She didn't hesitate. One swift, precise strike, and Vance went limp in Jace's grip. Jace released him, gasping, chest heaving. Mira reached out and pulled him to his feet. "You're either very brave," she said, "or very stupid. Likely both." Jace grabbed his rifle, checking it quickly. Still loaded. Still sound. The camp was quieter now, though the ground told the cost. Bodies lay scattered, more of Slade's men than Rook's, but the Apache had bled too. Wounded were dragged to shelter. Elders covered the fallen with blankets. The rest of the riders had pulled back beyond the canyon's edge. Rook came striding toward them, face carved with grim certainty. They'll be back. That was only their first try. Jace wiped blood from his lip. Who are they? Why chase so hard? Before Rook could speak, a voice rang from beyond the camp. Slade. Alive, standing tall at rifle range, his men fanned around him. Rook, he called, we need words. Rook's jaw tightened. He walked toward the edge, Jace trailing despite the warning in his gut to stay low. Slade stood with hands raised, but his pistols rested easy at his sides. His men, fewer now, still looked dangerous. You've made your point, Slade called out. But this doesn't end here. You know it. Rook's voice cut cold across the canyon. Then answer me. Why hunt my daughters? Why track this rancher? Who sent you? Slade's face twisted, almost pitying. So you truly don't know. Your daughters saw something they weren't meant to. Something powerful men would kill to keep buried. And the rancher, his eyes flicked to Jace, he became a witness the second he helped them. Ice spread through Jace's chest. What did they see? He demanded. Slade's smile was thin, humorless. Ask them. If they'll talk. But know this, others are coming. And the next won't give you the chance to bargain. He swung into his saddle, then paused, looking back. You bought yourself time tonight. Use it well. Decide what you're really protecting. Because once you know the truth, you might wish you'd handed them over. With that, Slade and his surviving men vanished into the gathering dark, leaving only dust, silence, and the taste of coming war. Rook stood still, eyes locked on the fading silhouettes. For the first time, Jace saw something in the Apache leader's gaze he hadn't expected: fear. They returned to the heart of the camp. Healers tended wounds, the dead were laid beneath blankets. Smoke mingled with the sharp tang of gunpowder, the air heavy with grief. Children peered wide-eyed from shelters, carrying a fear too deep for their years. Jace studied Rook as they walked. The man who had faced down 20 armed riders without flinching now bore tension in his shoulders, his jaw tight with unspoken weight. They stopped before the large shelter where Mira had emerged earlier. Rook turned to Jace, his voice low, meant for no ears but his. What I'm about to show you will change everything. Once you know, there's no going back to that ranch of yours. No pretending you were just a man who helped a pair of strangers. Understand? Jace met his gaze. I think I crossed that line the day I gave them my horse. Something flickered in Rook's eyes, maybe respect. He pulled aside the hide flap and gestured inside. The lodge was dim, lit by a single oil lamp. Faye lay on a bedroll, her leg raised and bandaged. She looked pale, but alert, her dark eyes steady on them as they entered. Beside her, Mira sat close, one hand resting protectively on her sister's shoulder. Rook knelt beside his daughters, his broad frame filling the dim shelter. His voice was steady, but heavy with command. Tell him what you saw. Mira's jaw tightened. Father, he deserves to know. He's already risked his life. He's earned the truth. Silence hung thick in the air. Then Faye shifted on the bedroll, wincing from the pain in her leg. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. We were out hunting, 3 days north, near the canyon where the old trading post used to stand. We heard voices, men. So we stayed hidden, watching from the ridge. Jace's chest tightened as Faye continued. There were 5 of them. Dressed too fine to be ranchers or trappers. They looked like government men. They met with another, wealthy, riding in with 2 guards. Myra's tone cut sharper, picking up where her sister faltered. They were striking a deal. The officials wanted land, a particular stretch sacred to several tribes, our burial grounds. The rich man offered to help them take it, for a price. Jace's stomach twisted. How? By framing us, Mira spat. Stage raids, make it look like we broke the treaty. Kill settlers, torch outposts. Then they'd say it was us and use it as an excuse to drive us out. Her fists balled tight. They talked about how many needed to die to make it convincing. Which settlements to burn first. The weight of it crushed down on Jace. He'd heard of land grabs before, families uprooted, promises broken without hesitation. But this wasn't chance or greed. This was plotted murder dressed up as law. They saw you? Jace asked Faye. She nodded faintly. One of the guards caught sight of us. We ran. They chased. We've been running since. Rook's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of generations. If their plan works, dozens of families will lose land we've held for lifetimes. Resist, and they'll call us savages. Comply, and we vanish just the same. Jace's thoughts raced. But if your daughters testify, if they speak of what they heard. Mira cut him off bitterly. 2 Apache women against officials and wealthy businessmen. Who would listen? What court would give us justice? The silence answered for her. None. Rook rose, blocking the lamplight with his frame. That is why they hunt without rest. Why more will come. They cannot leave witnesses alive. And now you are one too, Jace. You sheltered them. You gave them the horse. That alone makes you a threat. The truth settled like lead across Jace's shoulders. He had known, on some level, that giving the horse might cost him. But he had never imagined it would drag him into something this deep, this organized, this bloody. So what do we do? His voice cracked rough with strain. Rook studied him with eyes sharp as flint. You've already given more than anyone had a right to ask. You could walk away. Change your name. Start over somewhere new. Jace thought of his ranch, already lost. His life there, already gone. He thought of the moment he'd first seen Mira and Faye, beaten down, hopeless, bleeding. And how something in him had split wide open. No, he said firmly. I gave them my horse. You told those riders that made me kin. I stand by that. Something shifted in Rook's eyes. A glimmer of respect. Then understand what you've chosen. You're stepping into a fight with men who have money, power, and no hesitation to kill. Jace met his stare. I'm choosing not to run while men slaughter families for land. That's as clear a choice as I'll ever have. For the first time since they'd met, Rook's mouth curved into the faintest smile. Barely there, but real. Then we plan. Running won't save us. The truth, in the right hands, might. Mira glanced between them, voice tight. Even if we find someone willing to hear, Slade's men will strike again before we get that far. I know, Rook said grimly. That's why we move tonight. Before they regroup. Before reinforcements arrive. Jace's pulse quickened. Move where? Rook turned to him fully. There's a U.S. Marshal 2 days' ride from here. Grim. One of the rare men I've met who keeps his word. If we reach him, if he hears what my daughters saw, we stand a chance. What proof? Jace asked. Faye reached beneath her bedroll and pulled free a folded scrap, edges worn, stained but whole. I grabbed this from the rich man's saddlebag while they searched for us. She handed it to Jace. Jace unfolded the paper with care, holding it toward the lamplight. His stomach nodded as the words came into focus. It was no rumor, no whisper, this was a contract. Detailed lines spelled out payments, timelines, strategies for driving native families from their land. Signatures scrawled at the bottom carried weight, official seals pressed deep into the paper, government stamps that gave it teeth. The names meant nothing to him, but their authority was plain. His hands trembled. This isn't talk, he muttered. This is proof. They'll kill every soul in this camp to take it back. Rook gave a single hard nod. Exactly. That's why we leave within the hour. Small group, fast. You, me, my daughters, and 2 men I trust more than my own blood. Everyone else scatters, vanishes into the land. If they can't trace us, they can't crush us. We get this to the marshal, or the rest of us die anyway. Jace stared at the contract again, at the damning signatures condemning people for profit. He thought of his broken ranch, of the hollow life he'd left behind, and the one choice that had brought him here. 1 hour, he said, voice rough with resolve. Outside, the camp surged with urgency. Families hurriedly packed, warriors readied horses, weapons were checked and rechecked. Jace stood in the doorway, watching the storm of preparation and wondered, how many of them would still be alive come sunrise? And even if they delivered the truth, would anyone care enough to act? They slipped out under cover of night, guided only by moonlight and Rook's sure knowledge of the land. 6 riders in all, Rook in the lead, Mira and Faye sharing a horse, 2 seasoned warriors riding flank, Holt and Dane, and Jace at the rear. His own horse had been returned to him, the same horse he'd once given away. The act that had started this whole chain. They rode hard, silence stretching long as the land itself, pushing their mounts as far as they dared without breaking them. Behind, the camp dissolved into the wild, families scattering like seeds on the wind, praying to be overlooked. Jace knew survival for those people depended on whether this single piece of paper made it into the right hands. That scrap of ink and seal weighed heavier than gold, it was the difference between justice and slaughter. By dawn, pale gray light washed the world. They had covered ground, but not enough. Holt returned from a forward scout, his horse lathered with sweat. "Riders," he reported, voice clipped. 8, maybe 10. "They're pushing hard, on our trail." Rook's jaw tightened. "How close?" "An hour, maybe less if they don't stop." Uneasy looks passed among them. Faye was pale, every bump jarring her wounded leg despite the bandages. Myra's hand rested tight on the rifle across her saddle. Holt and Dane checked their weapons in silence. Jace did the math in his head, 2 days' ride to Marshall Grim, and they'd made it maybe a third of the way. If the pursuers caught them now, outnumbered and in the open, the contract would burn in the dirt beside their bodies. "We need time," Rook said flatly. "Time means splitting." Mira snapped back instantly. "No, father. It's not a choice," Rook's voice was iron. "Holt, Dane, you take my daughters north along the river. Longer trail, but safer. Jace and I go east, draw the hounds." Jace understood at once. The contract rode with Rook. And Rook would never trust another to carry something so heavy. "They'll know you've got it," Jace said low. "They'll throw everything at you." Rook met his gaze. "That's why I need a man who can shoot straight, and who doesn't run." It wasn't a request. It was trust, heavy and undeserved, but Jace felt himself nodding anyway. Within minutes they split. Holt and Dane urged the sisters north, Faye glancing back one last time before they vanished into a canyon cut. Rook and Jace turned east, into rougher ground, the pursuit closing in behind. They rode hard until Rook raised a hand. They'd reached a choke point between two sheer rocks, the kind of place a small force could hold against many. High ground above, narrow lanes below, nowhere to sneak through. "Here," Rook said, sliding from his horse. "We stand here." Jace dismounted, legs stiff from the ride. "We can't hold them forever." "Forever's not the aim," Rook replied, his voice calm. "Just long enough for my girls to get clear." He drew the contract from his shirt, studied it in the pale morning light, then pressed it into Jace's hands. "If I fall, you take this to Marshall Grim. Town called Redemption, 2 days northeast. You tell him everything. You make him listen." The paper felt like lead in Jace's grip. "Why trust me with this?" Rook's face softened just enough to show the truth of it. "Because you gave my daughters your last horse. You could have kept it, saved yourself, let them die. Instead, you chose their lives over your own. That tells me all I need to know." Before Jace could speak, the sound of hooves thundered through the narrow cut. Too many horses, too close. He and Rook dropped into position on opposite sides of the passage, using jagged stone for cover. Jace checked his rifle, 8 rounds left. Every shot had to count. The riders appeared at the mouth of the gap, 15, not 10. More had joined the chase. At their head rode Slade, beard gray at the edges, eyes hard with fury. He spotted them instantly. His voice carried sharp through the canyon. "Last chance. Hand over the contract and you walk away." Rook stood, exposing himself to open ground. His reply was iron. "Come and take it." The response was swift. Rifles rose. Jace saw Slade's hand drop, fingers tightening around triggers. Time fractured into single, jagged moments. Jace fired first, his shot ripping a rider from the saddle. Rook's rifle cracked a half second later, precise and final. But there were too many. The canyon roared with gunfire. Bullets sparked against stone, dirt and shards spitting into Jace's face. He ducked, reloading with shaking hands, heart hammering like a drum. This wasn't the camp fight. There were no warriors above them, no reinforcements waiting. Just 2 men against 15. A bullet hissed past his head close enough to rattle his ear. Jace fired blind, forcing their attackers down. Across the passage, Rook shot with grim efficiency, every round chosen, every target dropped. But even his calm couldn't hold forever. Slade's voice rang out again, thick with rage. "You're dying for nothing. That paper won't change a thing." Jace pressed against the stone, lungs heaving, the contract hard against his chest where Rook had tucked it. He met Rook's eyes across the gap. The Apache leader gave one slow nod, understanding, acceptance. They might not walk out of this canyon. But the truth would. And sometimes, that was enough. Jace raised his rifle again, jaw set. Then the gunfire shifted. From behind the attackers came the crack of fresh rifles. Confusion rippled through Slade's men. They spun, caught between 2 forces. Out of the dust rode a dozen men in federal coats, led by a figure whose badge caught the first light of morning. Marshal Grimm. The passage exploded into chaos. Slade's crew scrambled, trying to break away, but the canyon offered no exits. Within minutes, they were surrounded. Federal rifles covered every angle, commands barked sharp and final. Jace lowered his weapon slowly, his legs shaking so hard he had to lean against the stone to steady himself. Across the way, Rook stepped from cover, blood seeping through his sleeve, but still standing tall. Grimm swung down from his saddle. Older than Jace expected, gray streaking through his hair, his face carved with lines from years staring down men who thought themselves untouchable. His sharp eyes missed nothing. He crossed to Rook first, recognition flashing between them. "Got word you were riding my way," Grimm said, his voice gravel. "Figured if you came looking for me, things were worse than bad." "Worse than bad," Rook answered quietly. "We've got proof of officials plotting to steal land through blood and lies." Grimm's jaw tightened. He glanced at his men binding the survivors, then back at Rook. "Show me." Jace drew the folded contract from inside his shirt, hands still trembling from the fight. He handed it over. Grimm opened it, reading line by line. His face darkened as the truth laid bare before him. When he reached the signatures at the bottom, he swore under his breath, a harsh curse that carried the weight of a man who'd seen too much betrayal. "These are federal names," he growled. "Appointed men." He looked back at Rook. "You realize what this means? What kind of fire this will light?" Rook's answer was steady. "It means families won't be butchered for land. That's enough." Grimm nodded once, slow and deliberate. His eyes shifted to Jace, measuring him the way only a lawman could. "And you are?" "The rancher who gave away his last horse, and got dragged into all this," Jace said, bitterness rough in his tone. Something moved in Grimm's face, not sympathy, but recognition. "I've read reports. Said a white rancher saved 2 Apache girls, knowing it would cost him everything. Guess that was you." Jace said nothing. What was there to say? Grimm folded the contract carefully, sliding it into his coat. "This will be heard in a real court, with real witnesses. The men behind this will answer." He turned toward Slade, now bound and bleeding under federal guard. "And that includes your friends here, men who thought intimidation and murder were tools of business. They'll hang by the same law they tried to twist." Slade's face had gone pale, the swagger stripped from him the instant federal law rode in. Whatever power he'd thought he carried had drained away, he wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the quarry. For the next hour, Grimm's men bound the prisoners tight and gathered statements from every witness who could stand. Before long, Holt and Dane returned, Mira and Faye with them. The sisters dismounted, rushing into Rook's arms. The reunion was quiet but deep, foreheads pressed together, words spoken too softly for anyone else to catch. Mira approached Jace while her father conferred with the marshal. Her expression carried a new weight, no longer guarded suspicion but something gentler. "My father wants you to come back with us, wherever we rebuild," she said. Jace shook his head, startled. I don't belong among your people." "You gave us your last horse," Mira replied, her voice steady. "That makes you kin." "My father's words, but I believe them. You've nowhere else to go. Your ranch is gone. The same men who hunted us are hunting you. Coming with us isn't charity, it's family." The word cut deep. Family. It stuck in Jace's throat like a stone. He had been alone so long he'd almost forgotten what that felt like. Rook stepped over then, his wounded arm freshly wrapped. He didn't offer a handshake. He clasped Jace's forearm, warrior to warrior. "You gave my daughters your last horse when you didn't have to. You stood beside me when running would have been easier. You guarded what mattered when you could have let it all burn. That's a debt I can't repay, but I can honor it. You've got a place with us for as long as you want it." Something inside Jace shifted, a knot he'd carried since the drought took his land, since his wife's death hollowed him out, since he'd stopped believing in anything beyond survival. His voice cracked as he answered. "I'd be honored." Marshal Grimm approached then, the contract secure in his coat. His weathered face was hard but his voice steady. "This will take time, hearings, trials, appeals, but justice will come. You have my word." He looked Jace dead in the eye. "What you did, giving everything for strangers, that took a kind of courage this territory doesn't see enough of. We need more men like you." 3 weeks later, Jace was driving stakes into the ground of the new camp, built on land Grimm had sworn would be watched and protected. His calloused hands, made tough from years on the ranch, adjusted easily to a new kind of work. Children's laughter carried across the settlement. Elders told stories by firelight. Life pressed forward, scarred but unbroken. Mira brought him food at dusk, sitting beside him without needing words. Faye's leg had healed enough to walk again. Word drifted back from distant courts, the trials had begun. The contract had spoken louder than lies. Each evening Jace would walk to the horse pens, find the animal he'd once surrendered, and run his hand down its neck. He always remembered the moment, the choice that had changed everything. He'd given away his last horse at sunset. At dawn, Rook had come with 200 warriors. And in the fire and dust of it all, Jace had found something he thought forever lost, a reason to keep moving forward, a place to belong, a family that claimed him as surely as he had chosen them. Sometimes, the very thing you give away comes back to you, not as it left, but transformed into exactly what you needed all along. If you enjoyed this tale, click the video on your screen now to ride into another story of honor and grit from the frontier. And don't forget to subscribe, or send a super chat to help us keep these stories alive. Your support keeps the fire burning.